Hey, today I'm going to show you the exact process I used to make 7 figures in the last 14 months. If you guys don't know who I am, my name is Justin Nelson, and today I just want to tell you about that exact process of how I made 7 figures in the last 14 months. You guys can see it right here in our Stripe account. It's a business that we started 14 months ago, and I want to take you through every single step of the process so that by the end of it, if what I've done seems impossible for some reason, you'll just know exactly how possible it is on how I ended up doing it so fast. Let's dive in. Alright guys, so we're going to blast through these 6 steps, and it actually might be 7, but I'm going to put them up on the screen real fast so you guys can see them. We're going to label them off real fast. When it comes to Sphere Rocket VA, my current company that I made over 7 figures in the last 14 months, is number one is I had to define my target client. What I learned is I needed to define exactly who my client was and who my client wasn't, right? So for example, this is my ideal client. It's my background. It's a real estate agent. That's the language I speak. It's who I know. This is not my client, right? A landscaper, an electrician. It's just not who I jive with on lingo. I don't know anything about their industry. Number 2, I needed to figure out what my cost per acquisition is, right? I could obviously go with this method right here, like Facebook ads, for example, and spend money, or I could go with this method, which I like the best, which is a big whopping free. And guess what? When it's free, I had a more room to play with ROI. And so I had to define my cost per acquisition. So when I first got started, my cost per acquisition started off as nothing. I was going to call my sphere of influence. I was going to call all my past coaching clients, and I was just going to dive in and get as many appointments and exposure for free. And then once I started to generate revenue, then we started to pour in. So for me, I defined my cost per acquisition to start as $0. But if I hadn't, I needed to know that so I could budget, make sure I had the reserves, etc., to know what I needed to hit as far as budget. Number 3 is I had to define my lead gen sources. So that's kind of back on number 2. Since I had decided on number 2 for my cost per acquisition to be 0, my lead gen sources followed the same thing. Number 1 lead gen source, I was guest hosting a lot of podcasts. So I was getting on other people's podcasts. For example, Joshua Smith's podcast, Real Estate Uncensored's podcast, Home Snaps podcast, all these different podcasts that already had pre-built audiences that I could just deliver a speech to, deliver my story to, and then that the customer was already ready to buy, because I knew that the customers listening to those podcasts matched my avatar like we talked about earlier. So if we were to go through, it was podcast, it was networking, and it was calling my sphere of influence. Those were my main 3 sources of lead generation. Then we get to number 4, which is 10xing my lead gen efforts, is not only was I trying to get on 1 podcast a week, I was trying to get on 10 podcasts a week. And I think that this is something that when you're watching this video, no matter what business you're in, you need to 10x whatever you're doing, right? If you look around and there's an agent sitting next to you and they're doing 1 open house a month and they're making $25,000 a year, and see what the $200,000 a year producer is doing. And when I did that, I realized I don't need to be on 1 podcast a week, I need to be on 10. And so I would say that number 4 is 10xing your lead gen goals based on what you think you need to do and compared to what actually needs to happen. Number 5 was hiring everything out. And so every step of the way, when I found something that I didn't want to do, I just hired everything out. And as you guys know, I obviously use virtual assistants so we could keep the profit margins high. It's not like I was hiring out 5 people at $5,000 a month for a total of, $15,000 a month. Really, really cost effective. And that kind of leads me to number 6, which is probably the most confusing, and it didn't make sense to you earlier, is understanding the restaurant parable. And this seems a little bit off, but back in the day, one of my mentors had brought to me the restaurant parable. It almost felt like it was straight out of the Bible, where it was basically this. He said and sat me down and said, "Hey, Justin, I don't think that you're taking enough risk." And I had always been someone that, I'd come from the Keller Williams world where Gary Keller had taught me, lead with profit, lead with revenue, which was great, but I had conditioned my mindset so tightly around that I was scared to take risk. And when my mentor sat down and compared it to a restaurant, he kind of did it like this. He said, Justin, if you wanted to open up a restaurant today, even though you're pretty wealthy, you have a good amount of money, you're probably still going to have to borrow money. And I said, well, why? Well, he's like, the average restaurant right now runs $1 million to start, right? The type of bar we were talking about. He's like, between the equipment, the manager staff, the front of the house, the back of the house, alcohol surplus, the furniture, the redesign work, the POS systems. And he said, yeah, people start restaurants all the time and fail, and it's because they're willing to take loans, they're willing to take credit, they're willing to take this risk. And what he told me is Justin, I don't necessarily need you to take that amount of risk, but I want you to think about other people that have taken more risk and gotten to where you wanted to be faster because they were willing to put their skin in the game. What I mean by that is if you're thinking about hiring another VA at $500 a month, total of 4 of them for a total of $2,000, just know you're still 99% less risky than the guy that went and started a restaurant. In my case, the virtual assistant company, it really started to change my mindset to be a little bit more risky. And then that obviously leads us to number 7, which is using virtual assistants to do it. When I built this business, I built it based on virtual assistants. I have probably 25 now. It could be 30 on any given day. Virtual assistants that just work for me. And we've hired over 1,000 virtual assistants in the last 14 months, 16 months probably now alone. And so we use virtual assistants to leverage everything. So if you guys are kind of in the real estate space, what this would look like is that if I'm sitting down with a brand new agent and we're trying to build their plan, I'd say number 1, define your target client. Let's say I'm sitting down with a 35-year-old ex-engineer, right? I'd say, who's your target client? Who do you speak well with? Who would you jive with? They're going to say, well, how about an engineer that's 20 to 40 years old? I'd say, awesome. Then you need to go and acquire those clients. So number 1, they've defined their clients as a 20 to 40-year-old engineer. Number 2, figure out your cost per acquisition. What are you going to do to go and get in front of those people? The answer may be, hey, you need to go have coffee with every major HR department's head lead of every engineering corporation within an hour of here, right? So you calculate that, you go, there's 100 companies, I'm going to get 50 of them, and that's $5 per cup of coffee, maybe $20 a lunch, right? Now we can define what our cost per acquisition is. Then number 3 is we're going to define what our lead gen sources is, which we kind of already did, right? Having coffee with the HR managers, calling HR managers, maybe having coffee with the managers that aren't in HR, right? People that are just managers within the engineering world, because you're going to be able to have good conversation with them because you already relate to what they do. Number 4 is going to be 10xing the lead gen. So maybe instead of having coffee with 5 HR managers a week, you have coffee with 20 HR managers a week, because this is what allows you to get to 6 figures, 7 figures a lot faster than anybody thinks you can when you supercharge your income producing activities. Number 5 is hiring everything out. So you're like, Justin, what would I hire out in this case? You know what? Who needs to reach out to the HR managers to set the appointment? Who needs to reach out to the managers within departments to set appointments? Your assistant can, right? They can act as if they're you. They can reach out via text message, LinkedIn request, right? Everything can be systematized where someone else is doing it for you. They can do the back and forth to set a time. They can send the email confirmation reminders. They can send the post-meeting follow-up cards, right? Everything needs to be hired out. Now, you might need to do a deal or two first. I get that. You might need some reserves. That's totally fine, but you need to be willing to do it sooner than later. Number 6 is understanding the restaurant parable. Take a little bit of risk, right? No one's ever made 7 figures without taking risk unless you got lucky on Bitcoin, Doge, AMC, GameStop, right? Those are all rare things that happen up in this world. Maybe you got an inheritance. For the most part, it's pretty rare to get to 7 figures if you haven't taken risk. Number 7 is using virtual assistants to do it. Obviously, if you need virtual assistants, there's a million places to get them. I can get you a virtual assistant. Don't let that be a barrier for you, because virtual assistants will allow you a lot of profitability. So with that being said, guys, I know that video was kind of long. It's 7 different steps that we took, but I think that if you really were just to break this down, and I'm going to have the 7 steps listed below in the video here, make sure that you guys like and subscribe, because you'll get notifications, you'll get our ebook, etc. on this subject. Is if you guys can just go through these 7 steps, define your target audience, cost per acquisition, what are your lead gen sources, then you go out and 10x it, and then you hire everything out, and then you understand that you're going to need to take some risk, and then that ends up to you using more VAs to hire more out, right? Then you're really going to start to build a business that is leveraged, and when you have a business that is leveraged with other people inside of it, that's when you start to scale, right? When you have 10 mouths to feed on salaries and payments, you are going to do the things that it takes. When you only have your mouth to feed or your family's mouth to feed, you can be lazy. You can do 2 deals a month and scrape by and not have a lot of savings and know you're going to do another 2 deals next month. But when you got admin staff, now you got to go do 5 deals, right? Your profit margins may shrink, but your income is going to grow, and yet a smaller percentage of profit out of a bigger pot makes you more money in the long run. I make more money at 50% profit of $1 million than I do at 90% profit of 100,000. So just think about that. I make more money on a lower percentage profit of $1 million than I do at 90% of 100,000. So just think about those numbers, guys. I really appreciate you guys coming in. We're going to see you guys in the next video, but I really just simplified the entire process to how I made 7 figures. And if you're going to ask me, Justin, what was the number 1 of all 7? 10x the lead gen sources. If you don't 10x the lead gen sources, and nothing else matters. If you figure out a perfect game plan, you get it all pretty, you hire everybody out. If you don't 10x your lead gen sources, you're not going to do it. So if you're an agent, go hold 100 open houses this month. Don't think it's possible? Go ask Ben Kinney at Keller Williams. Go talk to Andrew Franklin, who sells 1,800 homes a year and is my mentor, right? They're going to tell you that these things that you don't think are possible. You've just been conditioned to not do them. So I challenge you guys. Comment below. Would love to hear from you guys, and see you in the next video.